Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda Stoops, the creator of the newsletter, The Reluctant Free Agent, and I'm really excited that I have the opportunity to speak with Colleen DelVecchio this issue of the newsletter. And Colleen is the founder of Maxity, which is a leadership development company. And I had the pleasure of meeting Colleen back in, I think it was April, at the Women's Leadership Conference sponsored by Bay Path University in Springfield in Western Mass. So those of you local, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm a firm believer in synchronicity. And Colleen, I really think that I happened to be at that conference attending your session for a reason. And I went into her session, and I'm not going to go into details of what she talked about because Colleen, you'll be really talking about some of it, but she talked about sort of pivoting from a job loss into a new career. And when I entered, we all got these little cards that were like postcard size with some information. And mine had a little sticker of a star on the upper corner. And I just thought, oh, this is cute. She just put little stars on it, for fun. And I didn't realize that actually meant that I won a prize, which I was so excited. I'm not someone who normally wins prizes and these things. So I was like, what? I'm glad I didn't peel the sticker off or whatever. So my prize was a free coaching session with Colleen. So I had the opportunity to connect with her again through that. And as I was thinking of this newsletter, and my last interview with someone was with Nick Tatar, who had changed careers, and there was a lot of interest in that. And I thought, oh, Colleen's a perfect person to interview for this issue. So thank you, Colleen. Thank you for being here.
So excited to be here today. It's so much fun to talk to people.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you here, and I know this time's going to go quick because you have so much good information to share with people. So maybe for starters, if you could just tell us a little bit, tell your story and sort of how you got from working the 9-to-5 job to founding your own company.
Yeah, I mean, like many people, right? I started my career. I had many different jobs. I ended up landing in higher ed and was working in higher ed for about 11 years, two different institutions. And I got into work one day, got called into my boss's office, and they said, "We're eliminating your job." Mm-hmm. And it was completely unexpected. It really blindsided me. I was the one who'd actually helped write the new org chart, and I knew positions were going to be different, but I didn't realize there was not going to be a space for me at that point. Yeah. And I remember, as most people, right? I was mad. I was sad. I went through all the emotions in 15 minutes. I was crying. I was right. It was actually weirdly the day of the employee picnic. And so half my team was waiting for me in my office because we were all supposed to go to the employee picnic together. And I come back and I'm crying, and right. I call my husband and he's like, "Okay, it's fine. It's going to be fine." And I kept thinking, it's not going to be fine. This is the worst thing that's ever happened. And fast forward after I took some deep breaths and calmed down and, realized the world wasn't ending because, the job that I thought I was going to have through retirement was now gone. I came out of it and my husband was like, "Listen, I've been telling you for years, you need to start your own company, right? You have so many connections. You're doing this. You love this work. You need to get out there and do your own thing." And I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a month." And then he's like, "You got to give it 6 months." All right, I'll give it 6 months. And so now it's been a little over 6 years. And for the longest time, every 6 months, I'd be like, "Okay, I'll give it 6 more months. As long as I make some money, I'll be good." And realized, right, this is actually what I love doing. I've loved being the independent business owner. I have a team of folks that work for me now, which also makes it easy. And as we were talking about, as we were getting on here, and I was on kind of a work trip / vacation last week, and I can do that now because I have a team who work with me.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really interesting that I think that your husband was the one who was like, "Hey, you always wanted to do this thing to start your own business, so you should start your own business," because he sort of planted that seed for you or saw something that at the moment you weren't seeing.
And part of it is I'm such a non-risk taker, right? When it comes to things like that, like when it comes to money and benefits and things like that, I have always, it is not something that I was ever willing to take a risk with. And, my husband had run his own business He had 30 employees he had run his own business for many years. He had some business partners. And as we're talking it through, and he was like, listen, anybody can eliminate your job. Anybody
Mhm.
can fire you. Any business can go out of business. At least when
Mhm.
you're your own boss, you're in control of that. You can
Yeah.
decide, right? Either you need to get out there and market, or you start to realize maybe what I'm offering isn't what the world needs, and you pivot and you kind of figure it
Mm.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting going back to that, like, what you were talking about with benefits and stuff, because I think that's, like, something, and I don't wanna say that, like, "Oh, people just get hung up on that," because those are real things, like, we need health insurance, and we need to save for retirement and all of that, and I appreciate that you were sort of like, "Well, I'll give this," well, maybe a month, as you said, as your husband said, wasn't enough time, but sort of giving yourself some grace to say, I need some time to see if this is going to work or not. How long do you think it took you before you stopped saying, I'll do it for another 6 months? Right. I mean, it feels like you're all in right now, unless I'm missing something. Maybe you're
Yeah,
still
and
on.
so I'll say that I am all in, but I always still have that thought in the back of my head
Mhm.
that if something goes wrong, I can always get a job. And I
Mhm.
think that's it helps me in the sense that I'm also not afraid to be like, you know what, if for some reason everything tanked tomorrow and I couldn't find a job in my field, and I wasn't collecting unemployment because I'm my own boss, right? It's not like I
Mhm.
have unemployment insurance anymore. So if that ever happened, am I willing to go waitress or work at Target or something like that? Like,
Mhm.
absolutely. Like, I know if we actually needed the money, I could do something. And I
Mhm.
think that willingness to be able to kind of pivot or squiggle, as I always talk about, right,
Mhm.
is the thing that has made it feel better over time.
Mhm.
I'm it's not that I'm a pessimist. It's more, I feel like I'm just always in the mindset of how far out do I have the money coming in for as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur? And so I'm always
Mhm.
playing that game of
Yeah.
this. And I know I can stop playing that because the business is doing really well and I do have people who work for me and all of that.
Mhm.
But there's still that, I mean, it's a little bit of the imposter syndrome piece that I think a lot of us
Yeah.
have, right? Of like, am I doing this right? Is there a piece I'm missing? And particularly, I think with running a business, because I'm like, I'm the person in charge of marketing and social media and
Mhm.
accounting and, strategic planning, all of those things. So,
Yeah. So with that said, in starting a business, like, whether or not you have people working for you at first, like, just even the thought of, like, how do you know, like, you talk about marketing, social media. I mean, I guess we can all do that, but we can't all do that well. Do you know what I
right.
mean? Like, anyone
Yes.
can put stuff on social media or market. And I'm using myself as an example. I'm not, I don't consider myself like, marketing is one of my strengths, but how did you figure that all out? Because I'm assuming you didn't have strengths in all of those areas.
Oh, absolutely
Or
not.
maybe you did.
No, no, 100% did not. Still struggle with many of those areas. For me, I went out and sought help right from the start.
Okay.
So everything from I worked with SCORE, which is the Service Corps of Retired Executives. They're through the Small Business Administration. I got myself a mentor through them.
Mm,
After about 2 years, I ended up joining a business accelerator through CWE, the Center for Women in Enterprise, which really helps women business owners launch their businesses and get better.
mhm,
And so I took their class. From there, this past year, I just did another one. I mean, I've been around 6 years, but I still took another one through Tuck
mhm,
Business School up at Dartmouth. So I'm always trying to kind of learn the things, make sure that I'm also working on the business while I'm working in the business, right? That
yeah,
whole piece, because it is something that I'm never going to be good at all of the things, right? I
mhm,
have an accountant who does my taxes for me. I would never do my business taxes, right?
mm.
It would never, they would never be right, right? Um, so, and I feel like, yes, I could do my personal taxes for a while, but even we hit a point that I won't do those. So I started to think about what are the pieces that I needed to contract out. Um, the,
Mhm,
so the first thing I did was my accountant.
yeah,
Um, the next thing I contracted out was my website. I paid somebody to build my website, do all my branding. They taught me a lot about social media, so I still do that myself. But
yeah,
there are so many parts of it. And as a business owner, I think the important thing is to figure out what are the things you enjoy doing and what are the things that just drain you. It's the same thing I talk to people
mm,
about when they're looking to change careers, right? You think about the parts of your job that drain
Mhm.
you and suck the energy out of you. Well, those are the things you don't want to be doing, because then you don't have any energy for the rest of your life, right? So
Yeah.
I'm always talking to people about, how do you figure out what energizes you, what drains you, and can you pivot in a way that gets you to do more of what energizes you and less of what drains you.
And I think that, like, if you think at a very basic level, like that's what work should be about. Like we should, I mean, we all have tasks, and you probably do too, even though
Right.
like you ideally segment them out. But like we all have moments where we're like, oh, this is a drag. But you want the moments that bring you joy and meaning and purpose, like to be significantly greater than those activities that you're like, oh, I got to do this again, or I got to do my accounting or whatever
Right.
it is. So
Right.
yeah, so it sounds like really being thoughtful as you approach this in terms of like one, knowing what will bring you joy and meaning, but also what your skill set is and what it isn't, and what you're willing to learn that will be okay to learn and take on, and what you're like with the accounting, like that's just never going to happen for you.
Right. And it's the type of thing. I think of things like sending invoices. Like,
Hmm.
can I send invoices? Absolutely. Like, do I
Yeah.
have the skill to do it? Yes, 100%. Does it light me up? No. Like in the beginning, I was never doing it. Like I would have a day every couple of months and I was like, oh, look, I have no money coming in. And then
Mm-hmm.
realized like I had no money coming in because I hadn't sent any invoices. Right. So it was thinking about, how do you put those things in place for yourself? Um,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
said, I think it's the same thing with careers. The other thing that I talk to people about often is, when you have those things that drain you, don't
Hmm.
do them at the end of the day. Like, don't do them at the end of the day. So you leave work, or you leave, right? If you own your own business, like you leave your work stuff completely exhausted, right?
Hmm.
Focus on doing those earlier in the day, and then end your day with things that actually energize you. So when you
Yeah.
show up at home and you show up for your life, that you have the energy to
Hmm.
do life stuff. That's really
Yeah.
interesting to you.
Well, fun fact, you then have a lot in common with Ernest Hemingway. I was just reading something about him where he talked about that when he would stop writing for the day, he like it was when he was on a roll and knew what was going to happen next. It wasn't like when he was feeling discouraged. He was like, "Oh, I'm going to stop today," because he knew the next day he could pick that up. So, yeah, so um, different fields, but same sort of process is
Yeah.
like
Right.
not.
Because otherwise we're just sucking the energy out of our lives. And
Mhm.
what's the point then? Right? Who
Right,
wants to live
exactly.
your whole
Especially
life feeling drained?
yeah. Yeah, and especially if you're running your own business, like, you want it to be something that's not draining
Right.
for you, even though there will always be moments that are draining, but more often than not, you want your glass to be full in a good way.
Yes.
So, yeah, so you had talked about getting support and coaching, and I know there are people who have lost their job and money's really tight, and they're like, "But I can't afford a coach, I can't afford this." Like, I think from when you and I talked, there are some resources out there that aren't costly or they're even free that people could
Yeah,
go
all
to
of those
and
that I just mentioned were 100% free. I didn't pay a dime
excellent.
for any of them. There
Nice.
are so many, definitely in the entrepreneurship world, there are a lot of free things out there. Um,
Mhm,
right. And so you just have to look and see. Like I mentioned, in Massachusetts, and actually in all the Northeast, there's the Center for Women in Enterprise. There
mhm.
are national organizations. There are chambers of commerce that run business accelerators. There's so many different opportunities out there that
Yeah.
are free. And so if you have a business idea and you're excited to kind of jump into it, then start looking at some of these free opportunities for yourself. Because there was one that I took that I don't know that I really learned anything, but I networked and I met other people who could open doors for
Mhm,
me. I met other
mm,
people who wanted to buy my services, right?
yeah.
I met other people. I met somebody who now takes my all does all my photography for me.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
So you end up meeting people, and
Mhm.
connections is how a lot of work gets done,
Yeah,
right? Both hiring and from a business development standpoint.
yeah, and that's a great point because I think, I have a really strong network in higher education, but it's taking me years to develop that, and
Right.
the thought of, like, changing fields, I'm like, "Oh my god," not that I would lose this network, but this network might not necessarily apply if I were in a different field. And so, yeah, it's sort of rebuilding your network. And it sounds as if some of those opportunities allow you to meet other people where you're automatically building your network in addition to learning.
Yes. And I think it's just showing up. It's showing up in person when it's
Mhm.
possible.
Yeah.
We've gotten all used to this Zoom, right? Or whatever
Mhm.
virtual teams, like whatever it is that you use. We've gotten so used to this that
Yeah.
we don't do a lot of the in-person pieces as much anymore. And so
Yeah.
I'm always encouraging, like if you're out there looking for a job, show up to events. See if there's a conference coming to your area that might even possibly be related to what you want to do, and see if you can volunteer at it.
Mhm.
Right? Often if you volunteer, you can go for free. So,
Yeah.
think about ways that you can do these things without having it cost you a lot of money, but get out there, meet people. It really
Mhm.
does make a difference.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because I think there's that I don't know, like, well, especially at first, I felt like I just wanted to like um, I was talking to someone who was saying, "Oh, you just want to burrow under your covers," but yeah, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, that's good for like a week, but like you got to get out there, and this isn't, this isn't the end." And
Yeah.
I think that's sort of it is that thinking of losing your job, of course it's awful, and like you, going through all the stages of grief and sort of at the end accepting it, but it's not easy. It doesn't mean like you became where you are now like in a month or 6 months. It took time and rebuilding and thoughtful, and even people looking in the same field, it takes time to find a new job. um,
Yeah.
so I think just getting support and getting out there helps.
And I do
One thing
think
I
we
was
all need that short period where you do burrow under your covers, watch 900
Mhm.
episodes of Netflix, eat, a pint of ice cream, like whatever it is you need to do to wallow in your
Yeah,
sadness. Just put a time frame on it for yourself,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I get there's no time frame for grief, right? People deal with grief very differently, but
Mhm.
unless you're independently wealthy and don't ever need to work again, you're going to need to find a job. And
Yeah.
so give yourself that short time to wallow in the sadness, take some time to reflect on maybe what went wrong, and then figure out, right, how to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so important, and also recognize, as you said, there's no time frame. I feel like I jumped into an interim role right away. Like I left my
Mhm.
job, and then that Monday I started an interim role because I felt like I didn't want to be sitting at home being like, oh, I on Monday saying everyone's at work but me, and then wah wah. But that didn't mean that I circumvented the whole grief process. It just like sort of put it on the back burner for a little bit as I got engrossed in that. But even like being home this summer, like overall, like I'm doing really well. I have things I'm working on that feel meaningful to me. But there are days where I just am off, and I'm like, you get in that funk, and I think it's important as you were talking about that we need to recognize that's okay and to give ourselves grace as we deal with this.
I was very similar. I was offered an interim role immediately.
Mhm.
It was interesting. It was a job I had applied for a year before. The person they
Mm,
had hired didn't work out, and they called me the day after I found out my job was getting eliminated and said, "Hey, do you
wow.
want this job?" And I remember having that moment of like hearing myself, which is what I say to all of my clients. When someone says, "Here's a job offer," you always say, "Thank you very much. Give me 24 hours or 48 hours, right, to look this over and think about it."
Yeah.
And I said to the woman, "Okay, give me 24 hours to think about this." And I went home, chatted with my husband, we talked it through, and I came back and said, "Okay, I don't know that I want a full-time job working for someone else right now." Right?
Mm,
Like, after what had just happened to me, I'm like, "I don't know that I wanna do this anymore, I'm not sure. So, here's what I'll propose," and I proposed a 6-month interim position to kind of do some strategic planning with them so they could
mhm.
then hire this person. Um, I said I need a month before I'll start because I decided I needed an entire month off. It was
Oh,
summer
good
and
for
I had
you.
teenagers, um, and we were going on vacation anyway for a week, so I'm like, "Okay, let me take a month off." And then I came into that interim role, and I did that 3 days a week, and then COVID hit, which was
Mm,
kind of, an interesting twist in starting a business, and I was, um, both lucky and, as I remind myself, like, well networked, and I built this, that, I was 6 months in, COVID hit, and they said, we just need to keep you on as long as we can. So they ended up
Mm.
keeping me on for almost 2 years in this
Oh,
3 day
wow.
interim role. So
Yeah.
from launching my business, it was great because I had 2 days a week to work on launching my business and 3 days a week to work that interim role.
Yeah, that's really nice. That's a gift to
Yeah,
be able to have the both. It's like the best of both worlds as you were
it was. It
developing.
was.
Yeah, yeah. One thing, Colleen, that strikes me is interesting about your situation is that with your leadership development, the work you're doing, it's not focused on higher ed, even though people in higher ed can use your services, but you're not like a higher ed consulting firm. And so when thinking about this career change, you didn't stick with just necessarily the field you were working in. You certainly branched out. Was that intentional, or did it just, how did that
Oh,
come to be?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when I first went out, I posted on all my social media, right? LinkedIn,
Mhm.
all LinkedIn and Facebook at the time, and said, listen, job ended, opening my own business. I'm going to be doing
Mhm.
leadership training and development. I'm also doing career coaching and executive coaching. Reach out if you need me. And, the floodgates opened. There were so many people who I had worked with in higher ed and so many alums that I had met while in higher ed who said, wait, like you're available for hire? Fantastic. Right.
Mm.
And we're starting to pull me into their companies. So it's that networking throughout life and connecting with people throughout
Yeah.
life. There were people who I hadn't heard from in 10 years who all of a sudden were reaching out or were
Mhm.
referring me to their friends. And that's it, right? If you're constantly building your network, if you're constantly bringing people in and legitimately, right? It wasn't me building a network so I could get hired. It was me building a network because I love people and interested in people and love doing keynotes. I love being on stage
Mhm.
and talking. And so I end up meeting folks like you. And right, this is how I just continue to build. And that's what really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how like our network, our existing network, even if it's not necessarily what we think of in the new field, if you're going into a new field, can actually help you move into that. Like in
Right.
your case, like people were like, "Oh, well, sure, we'll work with the Colleen and the new
Right.
Colleen."
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Which,
that was
yeah.
great. And I think I purposely didn't just go with higher ed because I have to say I was a little salty right after
Mm,
right
yeah.
having my job eliminated. I had a bad taste in my mouth about the industry and all of those things at that
Yeah.
moment. And, I get it. Looking back now, I totally understand. I can tell you a million reasons why this made sense. And
Mhm.
I never would have gone out on my own if that hadn't happened. So I'm glad in
Yeah.
that sense. But, right, it's still an ego hit. And
Yeah.
nobody loves the day when someone says we're eliminating your job unless you really hated what you were doing.
Right. But even then, like, we want to be the one to leave. It's like a
Right.
relationship. It's like you broke up with me, even if you were thinking of leaving, it doesn't feel good.
And again, right, I never would have left otherwise, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad I did, right? This has
Yeah.
allowed me so much more freedom, right? I set my schedule. I'm able to
Mhm.
decide what work I do and I don't do.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. It sounds like, as we said earlier, that it's ended up being a great thing, even
It
though in
did.
the moment it felt
Yes.
bad. And so I think that's a really important takeaway is that in the moment, losing your job can feel so overwhelming and like the end of the world, but that doesn't mean that things actually can't end up being better as a result. But part of it is you created this. You didn't just sit around waiting for this opportunity to drop in your lap. And I think
Right.
that again, that gets into agency and really putting some thought into what your next steps are. And with that in mind, I love that you have a podcast that focuses on this. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I host a podcast every week with my friend Christine. It's called Embrace the Squiggle.
Mhm.
And Christine and I actually met at a conference 11 years ago. And we sat next to each other on a bus going to dinner at a conference,
Oh,
connected. And then through the years, would just keep in touch, right? We'd see each other every year at that conference. We would always say things like, oh, we got to do something together, right? Sometimes we'd show up at the conference a day or two early and
mhm.
do some touristy stuff. And then through COVID, a couple of times we're like, oh, maybe we'll do, Instagram Live when that was starting and tried to do stuff like that. And then realized now we want to talk every week. We decided to run this
Mm,
podcast. And so now each week we interview a woman who has had a quote squiggly career, right? That it's a career where they have changed their career either once or multiple times or many, many times. We had one person on who had 11 jobs in 3 years at one point,
Oh, wow.
right? So
Sounds
many,
exhausting.
right? Right. And so, we every week we just talk to someone different, and it's been so much fun, right? We've talked to everybody from someone who was a vice president at the New England Patriots. That was one of our
Mm,
most recent ones, to um, one of the other ones we did recently, which was interesting because her career really wasn't squiggly. It was her life that she talked more
oh,
about,
mm,
because she runs a mortgage brokerage company that her dad had started. And so
mm,
she grew up in this business. She ended up taking it on, but she really talked about the difference of having one child and then having a second child, and how she had to kind of squiggle her career in life based on having children and what that was.
mm,
And
mhm.
so, right, every week we're just talking to folks who can tell you their stories, and you can hopefully get some inspiration from them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, again, going back to the idea of life brings us changes, whether it's in this case, the example of the woman whose life changed as opposed to the job. But that I think sometimes we can get so concrete or rigid and like, this is my career path, and
Right.
we're afraid to disrupt it. So it sounds like the podcast, it really focuses on people where that's happened one way or the other, and they're embracing it and moving forward. And I'm going to um, somewhere. I don't know if it'll be in the newsletter. People may have already seen this reference before they get to here, but I'll make a note of how people can access that podcast if they're interested. How many? I don't know with podcasts. Is it like seasons or episodes, or how many of these have you
Yeah.
done?
So we drop weekly, and so we haven't talked about. So we kept joking, saying, "Do we have to change it to seasons?" But we haven't missed a week yet, and
Oh well.
we oh gosh, I think this week we're dropping 87, maybe somewhere in the
Wow,
80s. We record them
that's
a
a
couple
lot.
weeks ahead of time. So yeah,
Oh.
we started recording in December of 23 with podcast dropping in January of 24, and
Mm,
it's been fantastic, right? We've had so many
wow.
people reach out saying, right, that this has really helped them, that they really learned things. Most of our guests are super generous, that you can connect with them on LinkedIn, and they'll have further conversations with you if you reach out. So it's
Oh.
really been great. We really enjoyed doing it, and kind of putting it out there to the world that, if you embrace the squiggle, it's actually going to feel a
Mhm,
lot better than if you try to force everything into a straight line.
mhm. Yeah, and what's fascinating is I was just thinking about this podcast and the 87 episodes. That's a lot, and a long time running. So easy for people to binge listen if they want
Yeah.
to. They could just listen, listen, listen. But also, I'm thinking. So you've got this podcast. You've got Maxity with the leadership development. You do coaching. You do public speaking. Like you really have this robust business running right now. And how many years did you say it was from?
Just sick. Well, it
Yeah.
was 6 in July. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations. That's
thanks.
like you're i- an inspiring example of what can happen. Clearly you've worked really hard to get here. It's not auto magic, but still it's amazing. I'm sure as people are listening that they've taken a lot of ideas from you. Do you have any last, as we start to wrap up, any last tip or bit of advice, or someone, whether they have lost a job and thinking of changing careers, or someone who maybe just picked this up and, they're in a job, but they are feeling a bit squiggly right now and wanting to move on? Any words of wisdom as we wrap up?
Sure. The task thing that I tell people to do when they're curious about, either changing jobs or starting a business, is
Mhm.
talk to people. Right? When I
Mm,
am coaching folks in career coaching mode, my homework for them every week is to talk to 5 people. And I don't
mm,
care if they are 5 people who are doing the exact job you want, but I want you to get on the phone and have conversations with folks about their careers.
mhm,
And even if you're starting a business, the same thing. Get on the phone, talk to people who do what you're interested in doing. and just learn from each other, right? Here, get curious about what people are doing. And, that whole curiosity thing, it takes you everywhere, right? I have people who are on my LinkedIn that I met because I sat next to them on an airplane, or I
Mm,
sat next to them at an airport bar. I tend to
mhm,
travel a lot for this work. That I run into people all over the place that I kind of gather the people and
mhm.
connect them with others so they can have these conversations. Because the
Yeah.
more you're out talking to people, and it doesn't have to be in person, it can be on the phone or with Zoom.
Mhm.
Like, the more you talk to people, the more likely it is that somebody's going to show you what door you should be going through.
Mm. That's a good point. Right. It's again the odds. The more stones you throw, the more likely you are to hit something. And
Right.
so, if you just toss one out there, it may be a miss. And so, yeah. So
And
getting
for
out.
job seekers, just don't interpret that as go apply to 10,000 jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because that all it does is get you into rejection syndrome. Right?
Yeah.
I talk to people often who will get on the phone with me and say, "I've applied to 1,500 jobs and I haven't gotten an interview." It's like,
Mm,
oh, right? That's not the way to do it. It isn't a numbers game in that same way, right? If you're
mhm.
going to play that numbers game, play it in the how many people can I actually have
Yeah.
conversations with, not how
Yeah.
many random job applications can I fill out on LinkedIn or Indeed or something.
Yeah. And if people were to do that, to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to X number of people, obviously, like it helps if you know someone who knows someone. But if you don't, would you just phrase it as like, can I speak with you for a brief informational interview or pick your brain about the field? Like, is that how you would approach it?
I tend to not use informational interview just because I don't know. For some reason, it feels very high school or college, I think sometimes,
Mm,
so
yeah.
people are unsure about it. I have people send things like, "Well, Melinda, I came across your profile on LinkedIn, or we're in the same group together, however you found the person. I'm really impressed with what you've done. I'd love to hear your story." Right? And
Mm,
when you get on those calls, the goal is for you to hear the other person's story, not for
yeah.
you to be asking them, "Help me find a job."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction because you're there to learn from them, not to get a job from them.
Right.
And most people like to tell their stories. If you give people an opportunity to talk about themselves, they like it, and
They
they've
do.
got a lot to share.
And I still do this. I do this all the time. I mean, I've asked complete strangers to be on our podcast.
Mhm.
I send messages on TikTok to people if they've seen a post that I thought was interesting. I
Yeah.
just did 2 weeks ago to a woman who quit teaching after 12 years. And
Mm,
she talked about she went on this like 5 week long hike and she was talking about
mm,
that, but she kept saying how she quit teaching after 12 years. So I reached out to her. Would you be on our podcast? She said
yeah.
yes. Complete stranger. Doesn't know me
Yeah.
at all. Reach out on TikTok of all places, right? So
Wow. That's
it
awesome.
yeah, and people are always going, "No one's gonna talk to me," and I'm like, "Okay, not every single person will, right? If you're
Right.
trying to talk to the CEO of major brands, no, they're not gonna talk to you.
Yeah.
Find the right level person, most people are gonna be excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think retrospectively, if people have asked me, being in higher ed, a lot of times students will reach out or like maybe newer professionals saying,
Mhm.
hey, can I, and I've always been happy to talk, I feel like that's also part of being a professional and giving back is trying to help others in their growth as well. So,
And the
and
last place
Colleen,
I was gonna say
oh,
the
you
last
go
place
ahead.
I'll tell you to go find people is professional associations. So if you decide you wanna be a basket weaver, go look at the American Basket Weavers,
Hmm.
association. And often there, you'll be able to find names of people who are active in their association. So they're most likely going to be the ones who are going to be excited to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And there's an established network right there.
Right.
And
Right.
with those associations, it's easy to join a professional association or at least to learn more about it. You're right. And I was going to say, as you talked about reaching out to people, like you and I had met because I got the free coaching with you and we talked around that. But again, it was one of those things where I reached out to you and I was like, Colleen, would you be featured in my newsletter? And you were like, sure. And like I felt like is she going to say yes? And so there's that sense of vulnerability, but like it was just like yeah, you were like fine, and here we are. So
Right. What's the worst that would have happened? I mean, the worst thing would be that I ignored you or said no.
yeah,
Right.
and I'd survive.
Life goes on.
Like
Right.
yeah, yeah. We've all had
Like
people say
I'm
no
gonna
in
come
our
back
life.
screaming and yelling at you, like, "How dare you ask me to be on, to record something for your newsletter?" Right?
Right.
So,
Yes, that would be bizarre, and it would be a good story. I could tell my husband later, being like, "You wouldn't believe." So, yeah.
I'd make
So,
your newsletter just in a very different way.
yes. So, walking away from this clearly, like, life is full of squiggles, including career, and sometimes we end up in a different place than we're expecting to end up, but that's not a bad thing. And you gave some wonderful resources and just examples from your own experience of ways people can think about this. Colleen, I really appreciate this. This has been so helpful. And even we've talked before, but even a couple of things you said, I was like, oh, in my own mind, I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard her say that before. So I took away some tips as well.
Excellent.
So you're on
Sounds good.
LinkedIn, so people know how to
Yes.
find you. Um, so any last words before we wrap up?
No, you can find me on LinkedIn. I will say I'm weirdly on TikTok. I say weirdly because I feel like I'm like the old lady on TikTok, but our TikTok's been kind of going viral lately. So
Okay.
it's been fun. So we're at Embrace the
Nice.
Squiggle on TikTok, and you can hear me rant and rave, every week about something around changing careers.
Excellent. So they can find you under your name on LinkedIn, Embrace the Squiggle on TikTok, and of course the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Melinda.
You are welcome. Bye, everyone.